Alright, we are back with a new video, and today we are finally talking about the Ridonculous Race, and we're going to be doing a team ranking, where I'm ranking all 18 teams based on the races that they ran on the season. Now, admittedly, when comparing this to other Total Drama rankings I've done before, I feel like this ranking is going to be a bit more straightforward, as a lot of it's going to be based on the results of each leg, where I'm going to be looking at how consistent each of these teams did across the race, which was definitely a bit wonky at points, as really a lot of teams were very inconsistent over the course of the race, where even the top teams had their moments where they would just fall to the back of the pack, but that's just what we have to work with here. But there are 18 teams to talk about, and let's not waste any more time, let's get right into the video. So starting off at number 18, the team that I believe ran the worst race on the Ridonculous Race is the first boots of the season, Leonard and Tammy. And there's not really that much to say. Now, admittedly, I feel like compared to some of the other teams, they didn't do as much actively wrong to be the first boots. But realistically, I didn't have that much faith in them coming into the race. And at the end of the day, there isn't really that much to prop them up for. So because of that, I do have them here at number 18. Now we're moving on to number 17, and we're actually jumping forward a couple spots in the boot order here. But considering how poorly this team did across their first couple legs, I couldn't justify putting them any higher. But here we have LAURIE and Miles, and they do outlast a couple teams we'll be talking about soon. They do get all the way to 15th place, but if you look at how they got there, they just performed really terribly compared to those other teams, where they're consistently in the back of the pack. 16th place in the first leg, 14th place in the second leg, 11th place in the third leg, which is actually their best performance across the race. And then in leg 4, they come in last, but that's a non-elimination leg. And then they're booted immediately after. Now, yes, they do technically go out due to a penalty, where they do finish the challenge first, but due to a penalty, all the other teams are able to leapfrog them. But still, looking at their first couple of legs, it's just so bad. And the fact that they also survive a non-elimination leg before reaching first in that last challenge really makes it hard for me to prop them up any further than number 17 here. Now we're moving on to number 16, and we are going back now in the boot order, but here we have Pete and GERRY. And yes, they are the second boots of the season, and they're another team that I had very little faith in coming into the season, but they do have a very strong first leg. They do come in 4th place in leg 1, which does raise their average placement to 10.5, which is significantly higher than LAURIE and Miles, who had an average placement of 14.2. Just crazy how they were able to do on that one particular leg. Now, yes, it does come crumbling down immediately afterwards. Again, they are the second boots of the season, but simply due to the fact that they got a 4th place finish, significantly better than anything LAURIE and Miles were able to do across the race, was enough to land him here at number 16. Now we're moving on to number 15, and we are again sticking with the boot order. And here we have ELLODY and Mary. And it's weird because ELLODY and Mary do technically have a lower average placement than Pete and GERRY of 10.67, but they were also a more consistent team, where they do at least get a 7th place finish in leg 1, followed by a 9th place finish in leg 2. And yes, while they're the third boots of the season, the fact that they at least had 2 legs in single digits was enough to have them at least above Pete and GERRY despite their worst average placement. And obviously, compared to LAURIE and Miles, it's just a more impressive track record for me. So because of that, they are here at number 15. Now moving on to number 14, and these two teams were pretty close in my estimation, but I did decide to go with the more sloppy team. And here we have Kelly and Taylor. And Kelly and Taylor were obviously a pretty dysfunctional team for a lot of the race, with Taylor really walking all over Kelly for a lot of it. And admittedly, I do feel like they have higher highs than the next team we'll be talking about, where they do have a 3rd place finish and a 5th place finish as well. But they also have plenty of mediocre finishes as well. Like they have a 13th place finish in the first leg, 11th place, leg 2, 10th place, leg 3, 13th place again in like 4th, and that was due to a penalty where Taylor just didn't want to do the challenge with her mom. And obviously after their 5th place finish, it just is downhill from there and they're eliminated. So really not a super impressive race as well. And they do lose focus due to their relationship problems with Taylor just not like doing things because she doesn't want to and just acting really entitled for a lot of it. That really does do them in by the end of it, where yes, they do reconcile, but obviously Taylor was dragging down the team much more throughout the race. And in general, that's a pretty big knock to their overall performance. But again, they did make it a decent amount further than the teams we've already talked about. So because of that, they are here at number 14. Now we're moving on to number 13, and this team was pretty close with Kelly and Taylor, but I do feel like they were a bit more consistent across the race. And here we have Jay and Mickey. And again, they actually have a very similar average placement to Kelly and Taylor, where they have a 9.9 compared to Kelly and Taylor's 10 even. Now, again, it's still not a good race. I mean, they do get 4 12th place finishes in a row to start off the race. You know, after that, they get a 7th place finish, 11th place finish, 9th place finish. That's not particularly great. Now, they do get a 3rd place finish, which is pretty good, but then they immediately fall back to 9th place, and then obviously they're eliminated thereafter. So it's not as if they have an amazing track record per se, but I do still feel like they're a more consistent team than Kelly and Taylor. I feel like they made fewer mistakes during the race than Kelly and Taylor. And plus, I feel like there's other things you can point to, like the fact that they were able to build a relationship with the twins. And yes, while the twins do eventually stab them in the back when Owen and Noah were on the verge of elimination, and that's why they end up going out. I still feel like there's more impressive elements of Jay and Mickey's race that does lead them a bit higher at number 13. Now I'm moving on to number 12, and I'm a bit surprised this team is as high as they are, and especially considering how early boots they are. But when you look at their performance across the race, it's actually pretty impressive. But here we have Tom and Jen, who, again, I know they were in 14th place, but they have an average placement of 7.83, which is a pretty big jump compared to all these other teams we just talked about. And again, looking at the track record, I mean, they did get 10th place in the first leg, sort of middle of the pack, but then they get a 7th place finish in leg 2, 5th place finish in leg 3, 2nd place finish in leg 4, and a 9th place finish in leg 5. So they get out to a really impressive start across the race. And yes, while they are the next boots, a lot of that is due to that one challenge where they had to do a flip and Tom was just unable to do it. So yes, it is bad that Tom was unable to do that challenge that caused them to fall so far behind. But again, compared to all the other teams we talked about so far, I feel like they just have a better track record and they have more impressive finishes during their short run compared to some teams that made it further than them. But again, considering that they were 14th place, I can't really have them any higher than number 12 here. Now moving on to number 11, and we actually had the first team to actually win a leg on this list, which I do think is saying something about the way the wins were distributed across the race, but whatever. But here we have Rock and Spud, and yes, they do actually win a leg. However, even taking that into account, they are still a very sloppy team, definitely a very mediocre team, where they did okay in the first leg, getting 9th place there, but then they enter this whole slump period where they're pretty much in the 9 to 15 range for a decent chunk of the race. And then when they get to China, they end up surviving a non-elimination leg. That's not particularly great. But then immediately afterwards, they do go to Finland, and that's when they win their leg. Now, granted, a lot of that is because the challenge was suited to them, where it was obviously the air guitar competition, and obviously they were able to dominate that, win the leg there. But then they immediately fall back to the middle of the pack, getting 2 9th place finishes in a row. And then obviously they get into that shootout with Lorenzo and Chet. That doesn't really matter as it was a double elimination. So really, it's a very mediocre race, and I do feel like they are a less consistent team than even someone like a Tom and Jen, for example. But I still feel like they have higher highs. I mean, they still did win that one leg across the race, but really they were just in the middle of the pack for a lot of it. A lot of their storyline was Rock trying to get Spud to be motivated because Spud was pretty useless for a lot of the race. But again, the fact that they do at least have a win is more than I can say for the other teams. So because of that, I do have them here at number 11. Now we're moving on to number 10, and we definitely have one of the more turbulent teams across the season, though one that still did somewhat well across the race. And here we have DWAYNE and Junior. And I always think of them as being this really up and down team where they get off to a really terrible start where they are second to last on the first leg. They are almost the first boots of the season. But then they bounce back. They get 5th place in leg 2, they get 4th place in leg 3, and they actually would have won that leg had they not read the travel tip too soon. They also have a pretty notable string of 6th place finishes where they do get 5 6th place finishes in a 6-leg stretch, which is pretty funny there. And on the whole, they do get 4 top 5 finishes across the race. Now, on the flip side, they do get second to last 2 other times. Again, in leg 9, they get second to last. And then in leg 11, they also get second to last. And obviously, they do get eliminated in 9th place due to DWAYNE getting lost and him searching for Junior for so much of the episode. So really, on the whole, I do feel like they are a more impressive team when you look at their overall performance. But when you watch it episode to episode, I just don't get the sense that they are a very consistent team. I mean, they, again, have some pretty low lows, but they also have enough decent stretches to the race to where I do have them here at number 10. Now moving on to number 9, and I was a little surprised this team was this high as well. Though again, if we're looking at the track record, it's not that bad. But here we have Lorenzo and CHET. Now, Lorenzo and CHET do technically have a worse average placement than DWAYNE and Junior of 7.54. And they do have, again, a not great first leg where they get 15th place there. But outside of that, they do pretty well across the rest of the race, where they do get a 5th place finish in leg 5. They get a 4th place finish in leg 6. They also get a 2nd place finish along the way in leg 12. But then obviously they are eliminated thereafter. I think if we're looking strictly off their performance, they're actually pretty similar to DWAYNE and Junior in that they are in single digits for most of the race. And while they do have some low lows across the way, I don't feel like those lows are quite as low as DWAYNE and Junior, which does make me a bit more impressed by Lorenzo and CHET despite them technically having a worse average placement. And it's because of that I do have them here at number 9. Now moving on to number 8. And for me, this is the pretty clear top 8 as these were the 8 teams that were probably the most impressive across the race. Although this team at number 8 is definitely the least impressive. But here we have Owen and Noah, who do have an average placement of 6.41. Again, a pretty big jump from Lorenzo and CHET and by extension, the rest of the list. And they do have probably higher highs than Lorenzo and CHET, where they do get 4 second place finishes. They get 3 4th place finishes as well, and they also get a 5th place finish. So again, that's 8 legs where they are in the top 5. Now, they never technically win a leg across the race, although one of those legs they could have won, except Noah wanted to impress Emma by letting them win instead of them. But it's still an impressive performance nonetheless. Now, as for the knocks, there are plenty of big knocks as well. They do come in second to last 3 times across the race, and they also survive a non-elimination leg, so they do still have some pretty low lows. I mean, Lorenzo and CHET never do survive a non-elimination leg, so you can give them that. But again, I just feel like Owen and Noah have higher highs than any of the other teams we already talked about, which is why I do have them here at number 8. Now moving on to number 7, and I actually went back and forth between these next 2 teams as well, as technically the team we'll be talking about does have higher highs, but they also have lower lows than the number 6 team. But here we have Stephanie and Ryan. And I do think Stephanie and Ryan do run an impressive race here, where let's start with the pros. They do win 2 legs. So again, more than Rock and Spud. They also get 3 second place finishes, 4 third place finishes. They get a 4th place finish, and they also get 4 5th place finishes as well. So that's a decent chunk of the race in which they are in the top 5. And that's really impressive considering all the other teams we already talked about. And I also do give them some credit for building a relationship with Devin and CARRIE, although some of that was Ryan trying to make Stephanie jealous. And it was just like a whole mess in like the whole Devin and CARRIE side story, but whatever. So there are very impressive elements to Stephanie and Ryan's place, and they do have an average placement of 5.18. However, the biggest knock to their race, and really the thing that's keeping them lower, is the fact that they survive not 1, but 2 non-elimination legs. Now, admittedly, as we're getting to the top of the list, non-elimination legs won't matter as much because realistically, most of the top teams do end up surviving a non-elimination leg at some point. But the fact that they survived 2 non-elimination legs, plus the fact that they still get 6th place, I mean, it was enough to leave them here at number 7. Although I was still impressed by their race, but again, considering the fact that they survived 2 non-elimination legs, was enough to have them here at number 7. Now moving on to number 6, and I'm sure some people feel like this team should be lower than Stephanie and Ryan, as they do technically have lower highs than Stephanie and Ryan. However, I feel like their lows aren't quite as low as them either, but here we have ENNUI and Crimson, and they do have a worse average placement by a decent amount. They have an average placement of 6.58, which is even worse than Owen and Noah. And it's not as if they are without their flaws. I mean, they do have a pretty bumpy start. They get 14th place to start off the race and 13th place in leg 2. And they do have some pretty rough patches along the way, with the worst probably being the Finland leg, where they do almost quit the race because their makeup fell off and they just sort of had this identity crisis of sorts. And yes, while they do rebound and get 10th place out of 12th in that leg, it's still a pretty bad showing. Like, the fact that they almost quit the race is a pretty big knock, and I did debate whether I should have it lower than Stephanie Ryan, who survived 2 non-elimination legs. But considering that ENNUI and Crimson never survive a non-elimination leg themselves, or even come second to last, even in that Finland leg, I did decide that was enough to give them the edge over Stephanie and Ryan, as even if we're taking that out, they do still have some pretty impressive finishes. They do get 3 wins across the race. They also get 2 second place finishes as well, and they even get 2 fourth place finishes to boot. So they still have plenty of impressive stretches along the race that do make them in somewhat high contention for me. But again, they still have plenty of knocks to their race, like the fact that they almost quit the race, the fact that they do technically get worse of an average placement than Stephanie and Ryan, and also the fact that they were booted 1 round earlier than Stephanie and Ryan. I can't really have them higher than number 6, but on the whole, I feel like the fact that Stephanie and Ryan survived 2 non-elimination legs was enough to bump ENNUI and Crimson up to number 6. Now we're moving on to number 5, and we have another pretty solid team that has some pretty impressive performances across the race, although again, there are still some knocks that keep them down. But here we have Kitty and Emma, and I do feel like they ran a pretty solid race for the most part. They get an average placement of 5.21, and again, they do have plenty of good finishes. They do win 2 legs. Now, mind you, one of those was Noah letting them win, so really it was 1 leg that they won, but still, it was still pretty impressive there. They get 4 third place finishes as well. They get 7 fourth place finishes, which is really crazy. Although, to be fair, 2 of those were last place finishes as they were in the end game. So take that as you will. And they do get 3 fifth place finishes as well. So they do spend a decent chunk of the race inside the top 5. Now, as for the negatives, they do get second to last twice across the race, and they also get last place in the leg in which they injure DEVIN and pull that team from the race, which, yes, they do say it's a non-elimination leg, but that also means that they technically survive the non-elimination legs, which isn't great either. But if we're taking them as racers as a whole, I do feel like they were a pretty solid team, and they definitely lack some of the bigger knocks that teams like Stephanie and Ryan or ENNUI and Crimson have. But I do feel like that compared to the top 4, those top 4 teams have higher highs for me that do leave them here at number 5. Now moving on to number 4, and this was the toughest team to assess because this team definitely has some very high highs, but they also have some pretty low lows as well. But we actually have one of the finalists from the season, and here we have Jeff and Brody. And obviously, the biggest knock to their race is they were eliminated at the final 6, and they had to come back into the race at the final 4, largely due to a really weird circumstance where Devin is obviously injured after Kitty knocks him off the cliff, and they obviously get pulled from the race. But then, due to a weird rule, they not only have to let a team back into the race, but CARRIE gets to decide which team to bring back, and they choose Geoff and BRODY because they worked well with them, which again, you do have to give them some credit for, but realistically, they should not have come back into the race to begin with. Now, if we're looking at their performance before the final 6, they actually performed pretty well, where they did win 3 legs during that stretch. They also got a 2nd place finish along the way, a 3rd place finish, they got a 4th place finish, and they also got 3 5th place finishes as well. So that's a decent stretch of the race that they spent in the top of the pack, which is pretty good there. Now, again, they do have some bumpiness. They do come in second to last 3 times across the race. They also have that really weird Las Vegas leg where they were in 1st place, but then they just decide randomly to keep doing the task over and over again because they thought it was fun. And they obviously end up falling behind because of that. And then obviously at the final 6, we know what happens. They're eliminated, they're out of the race, and they end up skipping 3 legs before they come back at the final 4. So not too bad, but still, the fact that they were eliminated would put them at the bottom of a winner ranking if there were more seasons of the Ridonculous Race. But after they come back into the race, they win out. They win every leg thereafter, which is pretty good, and it does pad their stats to a degree. And they do walk away from the season with an average placement of 5.02, which is really impressive. But again, there are still some pretty rocky roads, like obviously the fact that they came in second to last 3 times, and then obviously them getting eliminated at the final 6 and needing to come back into the race in order to even get to the final leg. That was enough bumpiness to lead them here at number 4, though on the whole, I was still pretty impressed by their race. Now moving on to number 3, and realistically, I don't think this team was overly impressive compared to BRODY and Geoff, but again, they do technically lack some of the flaws that they have. But here we have DEVIN and CARRIE, who again ran a somewhat impressive race. They have an average placement of 5.74. They win 2 legs. They get 2 2nd place finishes. They get 4 3rd place finishes. They get 3 4th place finishes as well. And they also get 3 5th place finishes. So again, that's a decent chunk of the race in which they're inside the top 5. Now, again, they still have plenty of knocks. They do come in second to last twice, and they also survive a non-elimination leg. But again, if we're comparing them to BRODY and Geoff, I feel like they are a more consistent team despite their lower average placement. And plus, they did make it through that final 4 round. They were going to get to the final 3 until DEVIN gets knocked off the cliff and they're pulled from the race. But had that not happened and they were allowed to continue to the final 3, I mean, there's certainly a chance that they survive that, and in turn, they could end up winning the race as a result. So I still think they're a mostly impressive team for the most part. But again, compared to the top 2, I feel like they don't quite stack up for me, which is why I do have them here at number 3. Now moving on to number 2, and obviously there are 2 pretty notable teams left to talk about. It's just a matter of ordering them. Although even then, I don't think it was that hard to decide. But at number 2, I did decide to go with the other finalists from the season, and here we have MacArthur and Sanders, and obviously they're finalists for the season, and they are technically the official winners of the season, and they do run a pretty impressive race. They do get an average placement of 4.71, they win 5 legs, including the final leg, they get 5 2nd place finishes, 4 3rd place finishes, and 3 5th place finishes as well. So again, that's a decent chunk of the race. That's over half the race in which they're inside the top 5. Now, granted, one of those 5th place finishes was an instance of them surviving a non-elimination leg, which again is one of their bigger flaws. They do survive 2 non-elimination legs. They also come in second to last 4 times across the race, which is pretty ridiculous when you think about it. Though to be fair, one of those times was at the final 3 and they just came in second. But still, that's still quite a bit of danger for them to be in, considering that they are one of the better teams from the season. But again, considering the rest of the field, I mean, that knock isn't as bad. And when you consider just how impressive and consistent they are outside of that, they are still one of the better teams from the season. And obviously, they do end up winning the race. But again, I feel like compared to the number 1 team, like they don't quite stack up to the same degree based on their performance, which is why I do have them here at number 2. And now, at number 1, the team that I believe ran the best race on the Ridonculous Race is easily Josee and Jacques. Now, yes, there are still plenty of issues with their race. I mean, For one, there's that entire Hawaii debacle where they literally flew to Hawaii just to return the volcano rock that they had taken from there as a good luck charm, only for it to be a bad luck charm. And they obviously then fly straight to Zimbabwe and run the entire leg and still somehow survive it, which is pretty impressive, but is also a knock in the sense that they decided to take the rock there to begin with, so it was a self inflicted wound. And really, I think that characterizes a lot of the race, where obviously in the second half of the race, so much of their arc is them just trying to undercut other teams, and they're trying specifically to target specific teams for elimination in specific legs, rather than focusing on trying to get first place themselves, which does more often than not come back to bite them. I mean, we do see them falling behind as they're trying to ensure certain teams are eliminated, and they're trying to sabotage other teams to where it makes other teams want to target them in turn, which I do think is a bit of a knock there. And it does lead more directly to them getting penalties as well. Like there's that whole train situation where they disconnected all the train cars in order to slow down the other teams, and they get a 1 hour penalty because of that. So again, there's plenty of issues with their race, and I do feel like they fall into this trap that we've seen other villain characters from other total drama seasons fall into, where they're trying to be evil for the sake of being evil, but by doing that, rather than focusing on the race for themselves, they are setting themselves back. And ironically, they probably would have done better if they had just tried to focus on the individual tasks and trying to do as well as they can, rather than trying to screw over other teams. However, even with those knocks, their record is undeniable. They win 8 legs across the race, by far the most of any team. And in addition to that, they get 5 second place finishes as well. So right off the bat, that's over half the race in which they're in the top 2. But they also get 4 third place finishes, though granted, one of them was their elimination, but whatever. They also get 4 fourth place finishes as well. So really, there are only 4 legs where they're not in the top 4, and there are only 2 legs where they don't finish in single digits, those being legs 11 and 12. They do come in second and last 3 times, and they also survive a non-elimination leg, which isn't great, but compared to all the other teams, the fact that they survived one non-elimination leg isn't the end of the world. And considering how well they do across most of the race, they are leaps and bounds above the rest of the teams from a physical perspective, to where their average placement was 3.2. Again, a massive jump from the next highest team of MacArthur and Sanders. They really are the best team in terms of actually running the race. And had they just focused on the race and not tried so hard to cheat or to stab other teams in the back, they probably could have won the race by a decent amount, if I'm being perfectly honest. But in the end, it was their own decision to try to sabotage the other teams, and their own drive to not only win, but win by crushing other teams, that ultimately does them in. And obviously, they do come out in third place. But considering their track record, considering just how dominant they were across most of the race, I can't have any other team here at number 1 than Jose and Jock. So because of that, I do have them here at number 1. And there we go. That will do it for this week's video. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe. It really helps out with the channel. Now, I know it's been a while since I have made total drama videos, but I am planning to do some more in the future, and especially as the new season is coming around soon. And if you like the total drama content specifically, I encourage you to check out my second channel, Survivor Gumball, where I do talk about shows similar to total drama and the Ridonculous Race, so you can stay tuned for that. As for this channel, I am planning to make more videos like this, as well as for other shows that I like, so you can stay tuned for that. And if you haven't already, be sure to join my Discord server, which I'll leave a link to join in the description. There's a lot of stuff coming your way, but for now, that's the video. See ya.